Hello, friends. So today we're going to get started with Learning Target 2. So it is I can write a scientific question and form a hypothesis. So our to-do list, you should have already watched the awareness test video, and then remember to hit mark as done after that. And then now step 2 is going to be watching this lecture video and taking notes. So remember to use either the digital notebook or you should be taking notes in a notebook, whichever one works best for you. And then after this, you have a Google Doc assignment called Reading Skillfully that will have to complete as well. So we're going to start out with some review problems. And so if you're doing this in a notebook, why don't you take a moment to pause the video and write down these questions and answers. So going over these now, there are 15 puppies in my backyard. So we want to figure out if this is a qualitative or quantitative observation. And so remember, qualitative is about qualities. So you want to think about our five senses. Quantitative is about numbers. So when you see numbers, you want to think quantitative. So I'm going to use my pen here. So there are 15 puppies in my backyard. Since we're talking about numbers, it's going to be quantitative. And then, second example, both of the apples are green. So think, is this about a quality or is it about a quantity, a number? And in here, we're looking at the apples being green. So that's going to be a qualitative observation. And then our last example here, my neighbors play their music very loudly. So again, is this about a quality or is it about numbers? And this one is talking about music being loudly. So we're using the sense of hearing. So it's a quality, qualitative. Good. Erase these. So make sure you're writing these down in your notebook because we will be checking these problems when you submit your notes. And then now we have one more page of review problems. So take a moment to, again, pause this video. And I want you to write down 2 qualitative observations and 2 quantitative observations. All right, so let's go over some examples here. So 2 qualitative examples you could think of. A couple things I noticed is you could talk about the color of the water. So the water is blue. You could mention the dividers being yellow. You could say the swimmers made a big splash. Now let's think about some quantitative, some numbers. So one thing you could make note of is that there are 5 swimmers. That is 1. You could also make note of there is 2 red swimsuits. And so again, you might have come up with some other qualitative or quantitative observations, and that's totally okay. Just make sure that you have them written down in your digital or your paper notebook. So that's done with review of our quantitative and qualitative observations. Today, now we're going to start talking about our scientific method. So this is a definition you should write down. So again, feel free to pause the video to write down our definition of the scientific method. So the scientific method is basic guidelines used by scientists to solve problems. So again, now we have practice using it in a sentence. The scientific method starts with an observation. And so we've practiced our qualitative and quantitative observations. And then now we're going to start putting it into our scientific method. And you use the scientific method every single day. I also attached our link to our PowerPoint, so if you want to check out the little video about the scientific method, feel free to do so. So our scientific method, you start with your observation. So we start here with our observation. And then from your observation, you usually come up with some sort of question. Once you have your question, you might do some research and collecting of data. You might form a hypothesis. From there, you're going to do your test and experiment. You're going to conclude your results. And then usually you're going to ask yourself another question. And so then you might end up repeating this all over again. And this doesn't necessarily have to go in this specific order. Things can change a little bit. Maybe your hypothesis comes before your researching and collecting of data. So just know these are some components of the scientific method. If you want to write these down in your extra notes in your digital notebook or in your notebook, make sure you do that. So let's practice. Well, actually, let's talk about our format and then we'll practice. So scientific question, our definition is a testable question that scientists want to find the answer to. So again, you have your observations, and then now you want to come up with a testable question. So using it in a sentence, a scientific question only compares two variables at the same time. So what we're going to be looking at here are two variables is going to be our independent variable and our dependent variable. And we're going to talk about these more later, but they will be coming into play for our question. So a couple formats you consider is how does blank affect blank? What is the effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable? So again, make sure you pause to write down this definition and sentence, as well as the format either in your paper notebook or your digital notebook. Erase all of these lines. All right. So now let's practice. So think about our format of how does blank affect blank. So our first question, let's practice with, is you want to see if playing music makes plants grow taller. So we're going to start with this one here. So let's follow our format. How does, and so we want to see here, it says you want to see if playing music makes plants grow taller. So we're going to see how does playing music, and then I will follow our format again, affect. And so again, we want to look at how you want to see if playing music makes plants grow taller. So if how does playing music affect, we could say plant, plant growth. Question mark. I know it gets a little tight in there. So that's our first example. A second example, you want to see if practicing will improve a player's batting average. So let's go with this one. Let's follow the same format. How does, so again, let's go with practicing. And then now we'll keep following our format, affect. And we wanted to look at batting average. So we can we'll put A, players. Batting average. It's a little hard to write on the screen, so bear with me there. All right, so take a moment to make sure that you wrote down these examples to help you out. And I will erase all of this. Takes just a moment. And then we'll go on to our next slide here. So now let's talk about hypothesis. So again, this is another definition and practice using it in a sentence that you're going to want to write down along with the variable or with our format. So hypothesis is a reasonable prediction of what you think will happen in an experiment based on what you know and observe. So using it in a sentence, a hypothesis is basically an educated guess. And so our format, if blank, then blank, because. And so again, we're going to be thinking about our independent variables and our dependent variables. So we could think back to our practicing and batting average, right? So we could say if a player practices more, then their batting average will be higher because, and so again, you're going to be using what you know and observe because the more you practice, the better you become at that skill. So that's one example that we could consider. So again, make sure you have this in your notes. And let's practice here. So we kind of went over the second one. So let's do this first one here. You want to see if playing music makes plants grow taller. So we will say if I, this one's missing the bottom there, play, we could even get specific and say classical music. It's a very piano-y soft music. Then the plants will grow taller. And then we could say because the music will be calming and relaxing for the plants. We could come up with some sort of reason for that. And so again, with our baseball one, we said if a player practices more, then they will have a better batting average because they are practicing that skill. All right, so that is it for our notes today. So remember, you can go back and forth as many times as you need, but make sure that you've been writing down those definitions, using them as in a sentence, and even adding in some pictures to help you remember these terms. So when you're finished with this video, remember to hit mark as done, and then you can go on to the reading skillfully assignment for today as well. As always, let me know if you have any questions.